Here's Charlie Dickens' episode entitled Winning. Do you win often? Said Charlie, who was impressed. Most of the time, said Bob proudly. How do you think I bought this lovely caravan? It changed my life, he said wistfully. When I found that old betting book crumpled in a bin in Knightsbridge, it definitely changed my life. I read it every night, day and night to keep me company, and it gave me an idea, an escape route. Where's Knightsbridge? Said Charlie, who was engrossed in the story. London, said Bob, inadvertently scratching his bottom through his tea-stained tracksuits. Where all of the posh people live and much too posh for me, said Bob, as he lit up a cigarette and filled the caravan with thick grey smoke. When the smoke had cleared, Bob could tell that Tinker had become quiet, and he was no longer smiling. In fact, he suddenly looked unusually miserable. Now, Bob may have had a rough exterior, but what wasn't obvious to anyone was that inside he was as soft as melted butter. Just as he was about to ask him, Tinker, what was the matter, Charlie stepped in and he told him the bad news. Bob was dumbfounded and he didn't know what to say. What a terrible thing for a young boy to have to go through, he said sadly, and the prospect of a funeral to cope with made Bob's heart ache for the poor boy. Made Bob's heart ache for the poor boy. All that he could think of doing was to change the subject. Who would like to go to a Who would like to go to a race course? Said Bob, smiling with enthusiasm. Charlie said yes, and he looked at Tinker expectantly. Slowly, Tinker raised his head and he nodded slowly. But Bob was pleased to see that he had a smile on his face again. I'll have to get organised first, said Bob, pulling up his trousers and rummaging through the cupboards and sending papers flying everywhere. I've got some money in here somewhere, he said. That's a strange place to put money, said Tinker, who had got his voice back. It's my bank, said Bob. It's as safe as houses and with loads of interest, he said with a wink. Tinker was puzzled. He knew a little bit about banks, and he knew that you couldn't accrue interest from a broken down drawer. That's not possible, said Tinker quite rudely. Yes, it is, said Bob, as he pulled out a big, sweaty black sock. Here it is, he said proudly, as he brought it up to his big nose and sniffed at it like it was a sweet-smelling rose. It wasn't. It was a very sweaty sock, and its cheesy smell soon permeated the room so badly that Bob had to open a window. I get wonderful interest on my savings because I'm interested, he said Bob with a grin, and he amazed them both by pulling out of the sock a large bundle of tightly bound notes. That can't be real money, said Charlie, amazed. Of course it is, said Bob, looking at the huge bundle lovingly. I don't play Monopoly, he joked. The bundle of money was as fat as a wrestler's fist. It's a bull's neck, said Bob, laughing, and he made the shape with his hand. That was how wide and thick it was. There must be loads in there, said Tinker, forgetting his troubles. Wait and see, said Bob, as he untied the elastic band with some difficulty and he counted out the notes. There were lots of 20s and 10s and a colourful looking one which he had never seen before. It was a reddish colour and it looked like foreign money. That's a £50 note, exclaimed Bob, and he ironed it out on the table with care and pride. I got a few of them, he said. Neither Charlie nor Tinker had ever seen a £50 note before, and they both imagined all of the sweets and crisps and pop that they could buy with it. When Bob had finished, he had lots of piles of money all over the table. It was like being in the home of a brilliant bank robber, thought Charlie. It was in Aladdin's cave. There must be £500 here, said Tinker in amazement. More like a few thousand, said Bob, who looked on proudly. And I won it all, he said, all with the help of my little racing book. Help me to learn to do that, said Charlie wide-eyed. One day, son, said Bob, scratching his bristly chin. It's the best job in the world, Bob said, and it was hard to disagree with him. Tinker felt a little guilty, as he had always seen Bob as an odd tramp, and he was known for miles around as a waster and a drunk. But now Tinker knew that he was neither. He was an entrepreneur, a businessman. This money's top secret, Bob said to the boys, and don't tell a soul, not even the pigeons, he said with a fat wink. Or I'll have more friends than Father Christmas, and they'll all want a slice of my pie, he added. Charlie couldn't see or smell a pie anywhere, but then it dawned on him that Bob meant all of the money and he felt foolish. Bob yawned a very big yawn and he didn't even try to cover his mouth. All of this money counting has worn me out, he said, as he fell back into an armchair, deflated. Tinker and Charlie took that as a sign to go. It had been an enjoyable and informative visit. Tinker was pleased that it had taken his mind off his dad's passing for a few seconds and the funeral tomorrow. As he walked home, Charlie had a question which had been bugging him like a persistent fly. He had to ask. "What's an entrepreneur?" he said, dumbfounded. It was the oddest word that he had ever heard, and he couldn't even imagine how to spell it. Tinker laughed for the first time that week. "It's entrepreneur," he said. "My dad used to say all of the time, it means businessman or self-made man," he explained. "Oh," said Charlie as he thought about it. "That sounds a lot like me," he said. "I'm sure I made myself," he said, laughing. "Yeah, you did," said Tinker, "and they made quite a good job of it," he added. They both filled the woods with their laughter, and even the birds chirped happily as if in agreement. When they arrived back at Tinker's, they had a quiet dinner, and everyone knew that tomorrow was the funeral, and it hung in the air like an expectant cloud. The food didn't taste as nice as usual, and every sentence seemed forced and unnatural. It was obvious they were all worried. Everyone just wanted it to be over, but they didn't say it. That night, Tinker couldn't sleep. It was like he was on a stormy sea. No matter how much he willed himself to sleep, he couldn't. All he could think about was the funeral, and it filled him with fear and horror. He did his best to think of a happy memory of his dad, but it was difficult. And then one memory came back to him as clear as a newly minted coin. It was his 9th birthday, and his dad had come home from work, and for once he hadn't been drinking, and he looked excited. "Look what I got," he said to a startled Tinker. He rustled through the box, and his dad brought something out which was an odd shape. "What is it?" said Tinker, wrinkling up his nose and his brow. "It's a kite, Dumbo," his dad said irritably. Tinker gulped, expecting a backhander, but none came, and he could see the excitement in his dad's eyes, and he did not want to spoil things.